Hello everybody, my name is Zen, and the second Diablo Immortal Alpha is going to start real soon, but there's a lot of cool stuff coming into this alpha that we should talk about because, oh my goodness, I'm so excited for the Cycle of Strife. But I'm not going to get too far ahead of myself. That is something we will talk about, but this video is entirely everything you need to know about this upcoming test and all of the cool new stuff that's going to be implemented into it. I do want to preface all of this with the fact that this game is still in alpha. It's not even in beta yet, and things are going to change by the time the game actually releases. So if you see anything that you find to be really cool or stuff that you don't like, make sure that you provide your feedback to Blizzard, because the changes should happen now before the game actually launches. And then, once it does launch, then it can kind of develop and have a cool progression as far as content schedule is concerned. But right now, things are subject to change. So just keep that in mind. So first and foremost, the Crusader is now available to play in the alpha, which is really exciting. The first test had the Wizard, the Barbarian, the Monk, and the Demon Hunter, and those classes are fine. If you've played Diablo 3, you pretty much know how they work, or you can get a pretty good idea of any kind of variation that they may have in Diablo Immortal. But it's going to be really fun to jump in and see what they did with the Crusader. Personally, the Crusader is one of my favorite Diablo 3 classes, and pretty high up there on my list of all-time favorite classes, just because I like the fantasy of that kind of, paladin, but a little bit more to the extreme on that. Overall, though, my favorite class in all of Diablo is the Assassin, and I keep telling him to bring it back. So, help me out here. I guess maybe for the time being, I'm going to have to just live with playing the Assassin in Resurrected for a while for the Diablo 2 remake, but I can always hope that maybe we'll get an Assassin later down the line. It's definitely a wish list of mine. And on top of that, we're going to be getting new zones, 2 new zones to be precise. So the level cap for the previous technical alpha was 45, and then for this closed alpha, it is going to be 55, so it's been increased by 10, and the current level cap that is planned is going to be level 60. So the first zone is Mount Zavane, which is going to focus a lot on monks and just kind of that culture, and that's going to take you from 45 to level 50. And then the second zone is the Frozen Tundra, which is going to focus more on barbarians and the whole barbarian culture. That's going to take you from 50 to 55. That is all hyper exciting because it's going to be cool to go to those new places, including a new dungeon called the Cavern of Echoes. Don't know what that's about, but it sounds awesome, and I can't wait to actually get in and play this new content. It should also be noted that access to Westmarch is going to be moved forward inside of the campaign, so that way you get it at an earlier level, which I totally agree with. I think that's a really good change from the technical alpha. Once you got to Westmarch, it was like it was almost like unlocking Skyhold in Dragon Age Inquisition, if you remember that, where you're just like, oh, this game is a lot bigger than I thought it was. There's a lot more going on to it, but it'll be nice to have access to Westmarch early, because I think that is when the game really starts to shine. Now let's start talking about some really cool, new, exciting systems that are being added into Immortal. The first is a PvE system called the Heliquary. And essentially what it is it's a fight against a boss. And as you go up in power against the boss, you go up in difficulty. The boss is obviously going to get harder and harder, and it's not going to take very long before you're going to want to bring people along with you and do it as a group. This boss there'll only be one of them during the technical alpha, but in the future, when the game actually launches, the idea is to have a new boss every month for the Heliquary, and by defeating the boss, you'll get an essence from them, kind of like a trophy, and it'll provide you with a bunch of player power as well. So it's just going to be kind of a benchmark for players to go and see how powerful they are, how much more powerful they've gotten. At the same time, it's going to allow you as a player to have more stuff to do just throughout your gameplay on a monthly basis. Now, honestly, I think the Heliquary sounds really good, and I can't wait to go and try it out. but in my opinion, it completely pales in comparison to the Cycle of Strife, which is a server-wide end-game faction-based PvP system that is completely opt-in. Now, I know what you're gonna do, because I was the exact same way. You're gonna hear the phrase PvP, or most of you will, and you'll be like, whatever, you know, not in my Diablo game. But I'll remind you, Diablo 2 had some pretty interesting PvP, and then in the original Diablo Immortal Technical Alpha that happened at the end of 2020, it had a cool PvP system in it, but that wasn't something that, in my opinion, was gonna get me into PvPing in Diablo in a big way. But the Cycle of Strife has completely changed my opinion on that. So before you hear the phrase PvP and you pass judgments on the Cycle of Strife, let's break it down, let's get into it, and let's really show you why this system is really, really cool. So from a lore perspective, I'm going to break this down in a really simple way, because I know that there are plenty of people who hear Diablo lore and it just kind of goes over their head. You know, they're not interested. But there's also a lot of people that are. So we're going to find a nice little balance here on simplicity. Essentially, there's three beings. There's Deodessa, Kion, and Akiba. Now, Deodessa made a thing when Sanctuary, which is the place that the mortals essentially exist in Diablo, made a thing called the Eternal Crown and gave it to Kion, who was tasked with protecting Sanctuary from all sorts of evil, right? Now, Kion created a group called the Immortals. Now, you can kind of see where this is coming in, because the game is called Diablo Immortal. But Deodessa also gave Akiba a secret burden that the Immortals would never fall or waver, and Akiba created this group of people called the Shadows. And the Shadows would sit there and test the Immortals to make sure that they were up to the task for defending and protecting Sanctuary. If the Shadows were ever to become more powerful and succeed against the Immortals, they take up reign as the Immortals and then become the new protectors of Sanctuary. And then the Cycle of Strife is what that is all called. So gameplay-wise, how does that work, right? How do we translate the lore to a gameplay system? Well, I'm going to just preface this again with it is completely opt-in, and this is also the alpha, so things may change. But the current idea from Blizzard is that it is a seasonal PvP system. And it's going to last, you know, anywhere between like 1 and 3 months, kind of like a Diablo 3 season. But obviously that's going to be tuned over time, depending on, you know, what players feel like, if it's going too long or if it's going too short or whatever. And you're going to have two factions. You're going to have the Immortals and the Shadows. Now, each of those two factions have cool stuff associated with them, but let's talk about the Immortals first, because the Immortals have a cap on how many players per server there can be. And when I'm talking servers, like obviously we don't know what they're going to do when the game launches, but let's just assume that there's going to be like an NA server, a European server, and, you know, like an Asia Pacific server. But that may end up being split down more into, like, you know, NA East and NA West. We don't know how that's going to be. I don't even think Blizzard knows, but there are going to be servers based on where you're at in the world. So there can be 500, a max of 500 Immortals at any given time. And these Immortals have access to their own cool little gameplay things that, again, they're opting into. They're opting to be an Immortal. The first of which is Kion's Ordeal, which is a 48-person raid in groups of 12. And that just sounds awesome. I don't need to hear any more. That just sounds great. If you're an Immortal, you get to take place in this, or you get to take part in this ordeal, and you get to go on this giant raid. That sounds awesome, again. But if you're playing an Immortal, you can get a faction-wide buff, which increases rewards from doing Elder Rifts, which is, you know, a main end game activity in Diablo Immortal, kind of like Greater Rifts, essentially. But the Immortals have to get this buff. They have to achieve it. And if they don't refresh it, it can go to the Shadows. So the Shadow players can actually get this buff if the Immortals fail to refresh it. Now, specifically for the Immortals, there is a thing in Westmarch called the Wall of Honor, where all players can go and view who the top Immortal players are on their server. So, you know, you could go and see, like, out of all of the Immortals that are there, out of the 500, who are the top players. And the coolest thing is the best Immortal player, not Diablo Immortal, but the best Immortals, the best of the best, is that person's going to have a statue in Westmarch that just basically shows off that, like, hey, I was the best person. It's unclear how long that this will last. It seems to be that it'll be a daily thing, that, you know, the Wall of Honor will reset for a daily kind of leaderboard, and that statue may reset daily as well. But the cool thing about, you know, being an Immortal is that you also get cool cosmetic items, including like this kind of angelic cape that really sets you apart from all the other players. So if you choose to be an Immortal, people will know. You'll look awesome and you'll be standing out from all of the other players, keeping in mind that in Diablo Immortal, it does have some MMO elements to it. When you go to Westmarch, you're going to see a bunch of other players. When you're out playing in the open world, you're going to come across other players. So you could just imagine coming across like the best Immortal that is currently playing on your server and being like, oh my God, it's that guy. Could you see that guy? This is amazing. For me, I really like this as a system with the Immortals, particularly because you get some 2004, 2005 World of Warcraft vibes when they added in the PvP ranks and system. You know, you would come across on the Alliance like a Grand Marshal and you're like, oh, that guy has put so much time into playing this game. You don't want to fight them. Like, they are awesome. And I remember just on my server alone, there was this hunter that just stayed at the top rank for months, and it was so difficult for other players to topple this person's reign, but we all knew who that person was, and nobody wanted to mess with them in PvP if you were playing on the Horde side. Like, this was, if you queued against them, you were just like, oh, whatever, we lost. So having even a relatively similar system in Diablo Immortal honestly makes me hyper excited. But let's move on to talking about the shadows, because yeah, the Immortals are cool, they are flashy, but they're kind of pompous, right? You're like, oh, they're throwing their names up on the Wall of Honor, who cares? Let's talk about the shadows and how they can deal with the Immortals. So first off, the shadows do not have a cap on how many players can be a shadow, unlike the Immortals. And the shadows can create dark houses, which are essentially guilds that compete against each other and have a max size of 200 players within each dark house. Now, for anyone who's ever played an MMO and has tried to join a guild or a clan or whatever, you know it's a little intimidating to try to get into a guild, one that you jive with and everything, especially when, you know, you never really know when certain players are on and like how to join the right. It's an ordeal. However, this is something pretty cool that Diablo Immortal is experimenting with. They are going to have certain times of the day, twice a week, that you can go make dark houses and join dark houses. So for the alpha, it will be an 8-hour period on Wednesdays and Saturdays. So you know when people will be making dark houses and when you can go join them. And that means that you have an idea of when these players are actually going to be on and when you can connect with them, and you find like-minded people who you may want to PvP with or you just want to play with in general. And I think this is a really smart idea and something that we'll touch on again in a minute. But the idea that your server that you're playing on, so let's say you're playing on, you know, North America, you're going to have an 8-hour period of gameplay that you can guarantee that you could probably jump on at one point in there, because it's 2 days a week, right? So this gives you an idea of when a lot of players are going to be on, because, you know, Wednesdays and Saturdays are two very different kind of days of the week, but having that 8-hour period allows you to be able to connect with the people whenever you're possibly able to get a minute and jump on. maybe you're taking a break at work, or maybe you have one of those days off. It just helps to have, a way to actually jump on the game and connect with those people. But that's just not the only thing that shadows could do, because that would be kind of boring, honestly, if they could just make these dark houses and that's it. No, they actually can raid a vault of the Immortals. So you and up to 3 other players, 3 other shadows, can attempt to raid this vault. And it starts as a PvE thing. It's like a dungeon. You're going through and you're killing these enemies, but there are certain enemies in there that have a channel, and if they get this channeled cast off, you don't basically kill them in time, it will alert immortal players that you are raiding the vault, and they can come in and defend it. So basically you're doing this PvE thing, you're killing these enemies, but if you're not strong enough to take these certain enemies out, then it will alert the Immortals, and the Immortals will come in and defend it from you, essentially. So the cool thing is, if you actually defeat the Immortals that come in, you can continue going through the vault, and no new players can join for a while. So you get like a breather in order to get to the end of the vault and steal all of the cool stuff out of it. Now, I know what you're thinking. Oh my goodness, this is going to ruin my sleep schedule if I really want to get into this, because there's going to be midnight raids, right? Where people just go in and raid the vault, and as an Immortal, you're never going to be able to stop them all, and you're always going to feel under the clock. No, that's not the case, because like with the assemblies of being able to join and create dark houses, it's going to be the same thing here. You can only raid the vault during certain hours of the day. So there's not going to be a moment where you're playing in NA or in Europe and you're waking up at 6 a.m. or 4 a.m. because you got a notification that shadows are raiding the vault and you have to go and defend it. So it does add some consistency to playtime and expectations as to when certain things will be happening. And that's actually really nice, because as a person who can have unhealthy habits with gameplay time in Diablo, that definitely gives me, my own rule set to have to work around. Like, yeah, I have an 8-hour period during these days that the vault can be raided. I can defend it then. But finally, there is a thing called the Rite of Exile, which is a multi-staged PvP event where a bunch of players can sign up, and the top players from the Immortals and from the Shadows, specifically the Shadows, they'll be able to determine who actually goes in to the Rite of Exile and who doesn't, because there's 10 of these rites that happen simultaneously. And if the Shadows happen to win more than half of them, so, if there's 10, 6 of the events essentially have to be won by the Shadows, then the top Shadow players, the top 500, are going to be turned into Immortals, which I think is absolutely rad, because then those Immortals become Shadows and the cycle of strife begins anew. Now, this is a opt-in thing, so anyone who is not an Immortal or a Shadow while playing Diablo Immortal is considered an adventurer. So you don't even have to do it. There's no rewards that are keeping you back, because you can't, get them unless you do the cycle of strife. And on top of that, it won't even, at least at the time of recording this video, it's not planned to progress your battle pass at all. So you don't even feel like you need to do it that way, as in trying to get your battle pass done every time one of those pops up. So in general, this is a cool opt-in thing that is super unique in the way that it is working, where, one side is trying to defeat the other side, and then it flips if that actually happens. And now the new Shadow players have to defend themselves as the Immortals. And I love the idea of this. I think that as far as PvP is concerned, it gets me super excited. I'm not generally the player that gets really excited about PvP, because man, you can have some pretty bad experiences playing PvP where people get really just bad-mannered and everything. And don't get me wrong, I love me some PvP games. I like MOBAs in particular. Man, I really fell in love with Heroes of the Storm. But there are times where you can come across other players that you just like don't want to interact with because you're just like, why are you being so rude or mean, or why are you raging so much? There's a lot of different reasons to not enjoy PvP, but this definitely seems like a system that I would thrive in. So I am very much looking forward to testing this out when the alpha does start. So a couple final little notes before we go back through and refresh our memories on all of this stuff. First off, this test is going to be lasting more than a month, which will give the Cycle of Strife time to cycle over once, which I think is cool and exciting to be able to see how that's going to pan out. There's going to be more alpha tests or beta tests coming in the future. Ones that may include the testing of the Necromancer, but right now we just have the Crusader, the Sorcerer, the Barbarian, the Demon Hunter. What am I missing? Monk. I think that's all. But once the Necromancer eventually does get added, I'm sure that things will get really fun in the Cycle of Strife. And then on top of all of this, I'm super excited for just any of the little things that they've done, adding the new zones, weird quality of life improvements that I'm sure we're going to see, like there's a better UI for the codex, which I think was needed. And then, things like challenge rifts are going to be more rewarding based on your best run that you do. And then elder rifts are going to be giving more rare crests and legendary gems. So it's just kind of like the team opening up their loot hands a bit and giving some of that stuff out a little bit more, making it more like a Diablo game where you're gaining more loot and not feeling kind of stifled or squelched by having to run content over and over and over and over and over again and not actually getting anything out of it. So quick recap. We have 2 new zones. We have the Crusader. We have a PvE system called the Reliquary, where you fight against specific bosses each month, and they get progressively harder as the difficulty goes up. So you're probably going to want to be doing those with other people. There's this really cool new opt-in server-wide endgame faction-based PvP system called the Cycle of Strife, which I just cannot wait for. Oh, another little quick note on that. Just like the current leaderboards in Diablo 3, for example, or just any of the leaderboards in general, the leaderboards for the Cycle of Strife are going to be saved each season, so you do gain permanent glory. You're not just lost if you happen to lose as an Immortal one season. But the test is going to last more than a month. It will include more players than it did last time, and there are more tests coming down the line, and hopefully the game will be out within the next 12 months. That would be ideal. With all of that being said, I've got more Diablo Immortal content coming this next month that the test is going on, so look forward to some Crusader gameplay and my thoughts on the PvP system as it currently stands. Then once the test ends, I will be putting up my final feedback video for this particular test for the team to digest and take that in, and then come back with new, cooler, updated stuff in the next test. But thank you very much for watching. Make sure you subscribe to see all of the new Diablo Immortal stuff as it comes up, and we shall see you guys next time.